Finding so many amazing things in one place, just under the ground, waiting to be discovered, feels almost like a dream. In 2018, a farmer's field in southeastern Norway became one of the most important archaeological sites in Viking history. Using a special scanning tool called ground-penetrating radar, experts discovered a huge ship buried just under the soil. This ship had been untouched for over 1,100 years, like a time capsule frozen in time. At first, people were excited just to find the ship. But as archaeologists started to dig, they found something even more surprising. It wasn't what was inside the ship that shocked them the most. It was what they found under it. Before this discovery, the most people ever found buried in a Viking ship at one time was 4. But this ship was hiding a secret that would completely change what we thought we knew about Viking burials. In late 2018, in an area of farmland in Østfold County, archaeologists were scanning the ground near the ancient Gel Mound. That's when they saw something unusual on the radar images. A long, clear shape that looked like a Viking ship. The ship was buried only about 2 feet beneath the topsoil. Even though they hadn't started digging yet, the images showed the outline clearly. This wasn't a sunken ship or a wreck. It was a ship grave, a burial site carefully placed and then forgotten over time. The ship was nearly 66 feet, about 20 meters, long, which means it could have held around 100 people when it was still sailing. This type of burial wasn't just about laying someone to rest. It was deeply meaningful. To understand why it matters so much, we have to look at how humans all over the world deal with death. Death has always been important to us, not just as an ending, but as something connected to life, society, and even beliefs about what comes after. Across different countries and times, people have created powerful and sometimes mysterious ways of honoring those who die. In ancient Egypt, for example, kings were buried in pyramids, surrounded by gold and protected by curses, so they could become part of the sky goddess's world. In China, emperors were buried under large earth mounds, protected by huge armies made of clay. In the British Isles, people dug tombs into hills and lined them up with the sun. Some people even believed the spirits used the sunlight to travel out of the tomb. Even in the Arctic, the Inuit people built special stone structures for their dead. But among all these traditions, there's something special and mysterious about burials using boats. In many cultures, boats weren't just a way to travel on water. They were seen as sacred vehicles that could carry a person's soul into the afterlife. Placing someone's body in a ship was preparing them for a journey, not across oceans, but into another world. This idea shows up in many stories from ancient times. In Egyptian texts, the sun god Ra sails across the sky during the day and through the underworld at night in a magical boat. In Norse myths, Viking warriors who died in battle went to Valhalla on burning ships sent out to sea. These beliefs were not just stories, they influenced real-life burials, like the one found in Østfold. Even though this Viking ship grave was a major discovery, it wasn't the first ship burial ever found. One of the most famous happened in Sutton Hoo, England, in 1939. There, archaeologists discovered a large ship inside a burial mound. It was filled with treasures from faraway places, like swords, silver, gold coins, and even items from the Mediterranean. This was probably the grave of King Raedwald of East Anglia, who ruled in the 600s. What shocked historians about that burial wasn't just how rich it was what it said about life at the time. The grave showed that early medieval Europe was more connected, wealthier, and more spiritual than people had thought. It also raised big questions. If one grave could change our whole understanding of history, what else is still waiting to be found? Where did the idea of burying people in ships really begin? Was it something that only the Norse people did? Or could it have come from even older Indo-European traditions, passed down through generations like a story that changes a little every time it's told? While we may never know the exact origin, what we do know is that by the time of the Viking Age, ship burials had become rare and highly special. These kinds of burials were not done for just anyone. They were reserved for people with great power and honor, like kings, chieftains, and elite warriors. Getting buried in a ship meant you had lived a life that deserved to be remembered in a grand way. So when archaeologists discovered a 66-foot-long ship buried near the Gel Mound in southeastern Norway, a place already known for its ancient Iron Age burial sites, they weren't just excited to find old wood under the ground. This wasn't just a ship. It was a powerful symbol of wealth, status, and spiritual belief. It raised the big question: who had been buried in this ship, and what exactly was placed inside? Even before the first piece of soil was removed, the discovery had already sparked curiosity about something much deeper: the origin of this unusual and powerful tradition. The idea of ship burials didn't actually start with the Vikings. It began long before them. In fact, early Germanic tribes had already started burying their dead in ways that suggested they believed death was not the end, but the beginning of a journey. And like any journey, you needed to be prepared, with tools, symbols, and most importantly, a vehicle to carry you. For these people, that vehicle was sometimes a ship. One example comes from the Merovingian dynasty, which ruled parts of what we now call France and Germany during the 6th to 8th centuries. These kings and nobles had grand burials, where they were buried with items like wagons, weapons, chariots, and, in rare but meaningful cases, boats. Sometimes they were even buried with horses to help them on their journey to the afterlife. These burials were more than just funerals. They were public ceremonies designed to show off the dead person's power, achievements, and legacy. They were meant to make sure the person would never be forgotten. But it was the Vikings who truly made ship burials legendary. By the time Viking culture began to grow around the late 700s, they had taken this old practice and transformed it into something deeply spiritual and dramatic. For the Norse, a ship was not just a way to move across the sea, it was almost a part of a person's soul. In life, it connected them to trade, exploration, and battle. In death, it became a sacred vessel that carried them into the next world. While other cultures, like the Franks, had once used ships, by the time of the Vikings, those ships were old, heavy, and hard to use. Viking ships, on the other hand, were sleek, fast, and easy to maneuver. They were beautifully built and played a huge role in Viking life. So when someone important died, being buried in a ship wasn't just about honor, it was about crossing from this world into the next. For the Vikings, the ship was the bridge between life and death, a final journey for the soul. The Vikings believed that when a person died, their soul would travel to the afterlife. If they died with honor, especially in battle, they could go to a special place like Valhalla or Folkvanger. In these places, brave warriors would feast forever, surrounded by other heroes. So in their eyes, the ship wasn't just a boat, it was a magical vehicle to carry the soul to this new world. It was a final journey across the great cosmic seas, like crossing into a different realm. The Vikings made this tradition their own, adding unique ideas based on their rich mythology. Their stories told of gods who traveled across the skies and oceans using powerful ships. Even the sun and moon were said to move through the sky in boats pulled by invisible forces. So when someone was buried in a ship, it wasn't just to honor them, it was also a way of placing them into the bigger spiritual world the Vikings believed in. It connected them to the gods, the universe, and everything beyond. These funerals weren't for everyone. They followed strict rules about status and respect. Only very important people, such as powerful chieftains, great warriors, or noble women, were given ship burials. Some of these funerals involved setting the ship on fire in a dramatic ceremony, while others buried the entire ship in the ground and built a huge mound of earth over it. These mounds were like ancient gravestones, large and visible from far away. One famous example is a ship burial that held 2 women, showing how even women could be honored with such a grand farewell if they held enough importance. Over time, the image of the ship burial became a strong symbol across the Viking world. It was a way to show who held power and who was respected by both the people and the gods. And this practice wasn't just found in Norway. It spread across Scandinavia, from Norway to Sweden, and even reached places like the British Isles. In fact, the first fully intact Viking ship burial on mainland Britain was discovered only recently. So when archaeologists in Norway found a 66-foot-long ship buried just under the soil, it wasn't just another archaeological find. It was a powerful reminder of a very old tradition where ships were used not only in life but also in death. The Vikings didn't invent ship burials, but they gave them deep meaning based on their beliefs. To truly understand why these burials mattered so much, we need to understand how the Vikings saw the world around them. In Norse mythology, the universe wasn't just one simple world. They believed in 9 different realms, all connected to one another like branches on a giant tree. This tree was called Yggdrasil, the world tree. Its roots and branches spread through all of existence. The gods, like Odin and Thor, lived in a powerful realm called Asgard. Humans lived in Midgard, the earth. Other realms included Jotunheim, the land of giants, Alfheim, home to light elves, and Hel, the realm of the dead. Travel between these worlds wasn't easy. It happened through magical paths, like Bifrost, a shining rainbow bridge that linked Asgard to Midgard. In this spiritual view, sailing across a sea was more than just physical travel. It was like crossing into another realm. To the Vikings, ships were sacred. They weren't just useful for exploring or trading. They were tools that could carry a person's soul from one world to the next. When someone important died, their body would often be placed inside a ship along with many valuable and meaningful items, such as weapons, jewelry, food, tools, and even animals or slaves. These objects were meant to help the dead person on their journey to the afterlife. There were 2 main ways Vikings carried out ship burials. Sometimes the ship was pulled onto land, filled with the body and the grave goods, and then covered with a large mound of dirt. This created a hill that would stand for many years as a home for the dead and a reminder to the living. These ship burials combined the idea of a ship and a tomb into one powerful symbol. Only 3 well-preserved Viking longships have ever been found in Norway, which shows how rare and important these burials were. In the end, Viking ship burials weren't just about honoring the dead. They were about preparing them for the next life, connecting them to their gods, and showing the world how deeply the Vikings believed in a universe filled with magic, mystery, and journeys that didn't end with death. In some Viking funerals, instead of burying the ship, they set it on fire and sent it out to sea. The burning ship would light up the night sky, creating a dramatic scene that could be seen from far away. This wasn't just a show, it had deep meaning. For the Norse people, fire symbolized purification, change, and the release of the soul. Burning the ship helped to end the person's life on Earth and guide their spirit into the next world. These funerals weren't private or quiet. They were big public events. The whole community would gather to honor the dead. Poets called skalds would sing or recite verses, telling stories of the person's life and bravery. Animals were often sacrificed during these ceremonies as part of religious rituals. These sacrifices were meant to please the gods and ensure safe passage for the soul. The size and richness of the funeral often showed how important the person was. A great warrior or noble could be buried with gold, decorated shields, fancy weapons, or rare objects brought back from battles or trade journeys. Viking ships themselves were amazing works of art. They were long, narrow, and built for both speed and power. These ships were symbols of freedom, strength, and personal identity. To be buried in one meant more than just having wealth. It showed the person had lived a life of honor and courage and was ready to enter the afterlife. Some ship burials were so impressive that even today, archaeologists are amazed by them. One of the greatest Viking ships ever discovered was found in Norway, and it revealed more than just old wood and bones. It preserved the way Vikings viewed life and death. They didn't see a big difference between land and sea, between living and dying, or even between mythology and real life. These ship burials were a way to combine all those ideas into one powerful tradition. That's why the discovery in Østfold County, Norway, was so exciting. What was found there wasn't just another Viking ship. It was something even older and more mysterious, maybe the missing link that could help explain how ship burials truly began. To understand this better, we can look at another important discovery that changed what we know about Viking history. Before the world focused on the Østfold find, another ship burial in the village of Lakehanger quietly changed everything. In this quiet spot in Norway, archaeologists found a mound that didn't just hold bones or tools. It held a secret about time. This site, called the Haghaugen Burial Mound, looked like many other grassy hills in the area. It was about 23 feet tall and nearly 200 feet across. But once experts began digging, they realized it was something very special. They didn't uncover the ship immediately. Instead, they used digital tools to map the site carefully. Buried deep underground were the remains of a large wooden ship. Even though the ship itself had decayed over the centuries, large iron rivets and pieces of timber showed that a ship had once been there. Mixed in with the wood were broken human bones, burned and shattered, suggesting that a fiery funeral had taken place more than 1,000 years ago. But who was this person? That part remains a mystery. There were no full skeletons, weapons, or grave goods left. Still, the size of the burial mound and the remains of the ship suggested that this person had been someone very important, possibly a king or leader. Some historians have guessed that it might have been King Hrólfr of Leikhanger, a figure mentioned in Norse legends. But those old stories, while interesting, aren't always reliable when it comes to real history. What makes this burial so important is the date. Tests showed it happened around the year 700 AD. This is key because most people agree that the Viking Age didn't begin until 793 AD, when Vikings attacked the monastery at Lindisfarne in England. That means this ship burial happened almost 100 years before the Viking Age even started. It shows that the skills and traditions we connect with Vikings, like building ships, holding grand funerals, and performing religious rituals, were already in place before the Vikings became famous. These weren't unorganized people just beginning to figure things out. They were skilled shipbuilders and leaders who already had strong traditions and a clear view of the world. The Leikhanger burial also helps connect two pieces of history. In England, there's a famous Anglo-Saxon burial called Sutton Hoo, which also included a large ship and dates back to the early 600s. Before the Leikhanger find, historians didn't know how ship burials in England and Scandinavia were related. But now it seems clear there was some kind of connection, either shared beliefs or the exchange of ideas across the North Sea. The ship at Leikhanger was likely large and strong enough for ocean travel, not just for use in rivers or close to shore. This shows that shipbuilding in Scandinavia was already very advanced, even before the Viking Age began. Seafaring was already a key part of life for the elite. So when archaeologists later discovered the Gjelstad, or Gjellestad, ship in Ostfold, they understood its place in a longer timeline. They realized that ship burials didn't suddenly appear with the Vikings. They had evolved slowly over time, growing in meaning, size, and ceremony. Thanks to the Leikhanger find, experts now know that the Viking ship burial tradition had deep roots. It didn't begin suddenly. It had been developing for generations. Leikhanger filled in a missing piece of the puzzle. It proved that the story of ship burials, and even Viking culture itself, had an older, hidden beginning. And with this new understanding, researchers turned their attention back to another burial mound in Ostfold. What would they find inside the Gjellestad ship? As it turned out, the discovery was even more impressive than expected. Although the exact person buried there remains unknown, the ship and the site have added a major new chapter to Viking history. When the Vikings lived, ships were more than tools. They were living symbols of freedom and strength. A Viking ship could move through the water like a living creature. When the Gjellestad ship was found in 2018, it was resting inside a massive burial mound. Even after more than 1,000 years underground, it had not been forgotten. And now, thanks to these discoveries, the full story of ship burials, from their mysterious beginnings to their legendary Viking legacy, is finally being revealed. Unlike other well-known Viking graves, this one told a very different story. The ship found at the site was believed to date back to between 800 and 900 AD, placing it right in the middle of the Viking Age. That alone was impressive. But what made it even more remarkable was how well it had survived through the centuries. Although time, weather, and farming had damaged parts of the ship, much of its hull was still in place. That's extremely rare for Viking ship burials, which are usually found in worse condition. However, the mystery didn't stop there. Compared to the Gokstad and Oseberg ships, which were buried 50 to 100 years later, this one was strange. The burial looked rushed and unusual. The ship was buried very close to the surface, only about 20 inches underground. This was not typical for elite Viking funerals, which were usually carefully planned and deeply buried to protect them. This raised many questions. Why was this ship so shallow? Was it buried in a hurry? Was someone trying to hide it? Or could it have been done during a time of conflict, disease, or some emergency? Even more strange discoveries were found inside the ship. The biggest surprise was what was missing. In the main burial chamber, where a body should have been placed, there was no trace of anyone. There were no bones, no ashes, and no signs that a person had ever been there. This was strange because Viking ships were usually meant to carry the dead into the afterlife. Yet, the grave was not completely empty. Some burial items were still present. Researchers found broken weapons, such as a damaged sword and beautifully decorated spearheads. They also found remains of high-quality textiles, showing the person buried here had been someone important. One of the most puzzling objects was a carved stone slab, placed right next to where the body should have been. No one knows exactly what the stone was for. It might have been a tomb marker, a spiritual object, or possibly a symbol for someone who was never actually buried there. Perhaps the most mysterious part of all was the arrangement of shield pieces around the burial chamber. These weren't just randomly scattered. They were placed in a neat circle, almost like a protective or magical ring. This kind of pattern is believed to have symbolic meaning. It may have been meant as a spiritual barrier, a form of protection, or even a warning to others. This was unusual and didn't match the style of earlier Viking burials, adding even more mystery. All of these strange details led to one big question. Who was supposed to be buried here, and why was this grave so different from others? There are a few theories. Some people believe the burial was meant for a king or powerful leader who died suddenly during a time of war or chaos. Others think it was a symbolic burial, maybe for someone who died far away at sea, and whose body was never recovered. Some even believe this wasn't a normal grave at all, but a ceremonial or magical place with a deeper purpose. Then came the discovery that shocked the archaeologists. When they dug under the ship, they expected to find more soil, maybe pieces of wood or natural debris. But what they uncovered stunned everyone. Beneath the ship was a hidden chamber that completely changed what they thought they knew. This chamber was unlike the rest of the burial site. The soil was dark and full of ashes and burnt materials. Pieces of charred wood suggested that a fire had once burned there, likely as part of a ritual. Whatever happened in this space wasn't part of the usual Viking burial traditions. It seemed like something older, deeper, and more mysterious. The biggest surprise came when archaeologists found several small silver coins buried in the burned soil. These weren't Viking coins. After close study, experts discovered they were Islamic dirhams, silver coins made in 9th century Baghdad. These coins had traveled an enormous distance, from the Middle East, across continents and oceans, to end up buried beneath a Viking ship in Norway. One coin in particular stood out. It had a hole punched right through the middle, as if it had been pierced with a sharp object. To most people, that might seem like a minor detail. But in Viking culture, that hole could mean something important. Vikings sometimes pierced coins to wear them as jewelry or lucky charms. But in burial rituals, coins were also sometimes marked in this way to show they were being given up, to remove their value in this world and offer them to the next. In some cases, piercing a coin symbolized danger, a curse, or a warning. It was a way to mark something as sacred, or to send a message. That raised even more questions. Why had someone placed pierced Arabic coins under a Viking ship? What message were they trying to send? Was this a warning, a blessing, or something else entirely? The coins also showed just how far Viking culture had reached. They had traveled not only to England, Ireland, and France, even as far as Paris, but also deep into Russia and all the way to the Islamic world. This connection to Baghdad through the coins added yet another layer to the story. It showed that Vikings weren't just warriors and raiders. They were also travelers, traders, and deeply spiritual people who carried ideas, objects, and beliefs across great distances. The grave, the missing body, the stone slab, the circle of shields, the burned chamber, and the foreign coins, all of it combined into one enormous mystery. It was no longer just a Viking burial. It was something bigger. A hidden message from the past, still waiting to be fully understood. Some researchers believe this discovery shows there were long-distance trade routes that connected the Norse people with the Islamic world. This hints at a secret level of diplomacy or hidden alliances that historians had never imagined before. Others think the coins found under the ship, especially the one with a hole in it, were left as offerings, or maybe even as warnings to keep people from disturbing the grave. But an even more chilling idea has come up. The lower chamber under the ship might have been meant for a completely different person. Possibly someone who was cursed, dishonored, or feared by their community. The burned soil and the hidden position of the chamber suggest it was kept separate on purpose. Some experts now think this may have been a double burial. One part was public, something meant to be seen. The other part was secret, hidden from view. This discovery has changed what archaeologists thought they knew about Viking graves. What began as a simple excavation quickly turned into a mysterious and haunting puzzle that continues to trouble researchers even today. The Galsted ship burial is unlike anything else ever found in Viking archaeology. Although other burial ships have been discovered, none have had this strange mix of signs. A large ship fit for a powerful person, a hidden burned chamber beneath it, foreign silver coins, and most unusual of all, no body. The absence of a body turns the whole discovery from an exciting find into a deep mystery. The top layer of soil was carefully removed and bit by bit, the ship was uncovered. But why would anyone go to all the effort of building one of the biggest Viking ship graves ever found, only to leave it empty? Some scholars think the ship grave may have been symbolic. It might have been used to confuse enemies, hide the death of a powerful person, or act as a spiritual decoy. In times of war or political chaos, creating a fake burial could have helped protect important secrets or mislead rivals. Others believe a body was once buried there but was later removed, either stolen, moved for ritual purposes, or even taken away by people who didn't want the person to be remembered at all.